Hey guys, it's Hannah, and today I am here with the one and only Victoria Schwab, the author of several of my favorite books. And we are here today in Menlo Park, California at Kepler's bookstore to celebrate the release of the finale of her series in the Shades of Magic series, The Conjuring of Light. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So for those who might not be familiar with the series, could you give a little bit of a synopsis as to what the whole Shades of Magic series is about?
Yeah, sure. So it's about a magician with the ability to move between alternate versions of London, officially as a messenger between the crowns and unofficially as a smuggler of rare artifacts or whatever catches his fancy, and he comes into possession of something he absolutely should not have, and before he can rid himself of it, gets his pocket picked by a cross-dressing thief named Delilah Bard. And that's essentially the instigating event of the entire series. It's obviously a lot broader than that, but that's kind of our collision moment. It's set across 4 Londons. Grey London, which is ours, circa 1819, and then Red London, which is Kells, White London, which has been corrupted, and Black London, which doesn't exist anymore because magic ate everything. And so it's this idea of what if we took a location down to bones, and then we built a new body on it 4 times. And so, yeah, it's about these interconnected Londons and what happened between them and how magic shapes us and the world around us and the people that live in that world.
So one of my absolute favorite parts of the series is the world building and the magic system. So I'm really curious as to how your process is when it comes to world building and then creating such a magical atmosphere in your books, and how you're just able to do that and what inspires you to do that.
Well, for me, thank you, first of all. For me, setting is a character, right? So it's the very first character that I write in a series is actually the world in which the series is set. I start there, and I do that because my main characters are outsiders. And in order to do outsiders, you really have to understand insiders. And in order to understand insiders, you have to understand the world that they're inside of, the fabric that they're a part of. And so I really build my worlds from the ground up and then populate them. It's really the first question that I answer. I would never want to do a story that could be set anywhere. Where it's set is hugely important and hugely specific to me. And then I set out to kind of build a bare fabric of that world through language and art and culture and idiomatic expressions and poems and love songs and all of the different things which make a people, and really understand their history and the fabric and what makes somebody feel like they belong, so I can figure out what makes someone feel like they don't belong. So a lot of authors will pick one thing, whether it's food or fabric or language. For me, it's language primarily. I use language as flavor in the books. It's a really good shorthand to show not only what a world feels like, but who belongs and who doesn't, because it can be a very exclusive and exclusionary thing. Lila, for instance, when she gets to Red London, doesn't speak the common tongue, and that's a really big problem for her, and she's actually marked by the language that she speaks as something else. So for me, it's just my favorite shorthand, but the world comes first. I don't write a story until I know exactly the world in which it's set.
Okay, so this next question is along those same lines, but I was wondering if each of the Londons are inspired by something specific.
Well, that's a really good question. Well, obviously they're kind of, in a weird way, inspired by their color palettes, because Red London, the river glows red with magic, and White London, it's as if there's a dusting of snow on everything. There's that kind of pall. And Black London is a void, is a place that actually has devoured itself. So I did actually start with the colors, and then I picked a location that kind of was meant to inspire. So Red London is actually inspired by kind of like a Persian influence, and like it's a conflation of Persian and Eastern European, like much brighter colors, much more much kind of bolder. And when it's like what I think of as like the most beautiful kind of, it would actually set in a Moroccan fair, it would work very, very well, but kind of that red and the gold and the rich palette and just kind of like a sensuality. And then White London is based on Scandinavia, because it's based on the really harsh climate. I was studying Viking lore at the time, and one of the most fascinating things is there's a theory that the reason that these Viking narratives are so extreme and so kind of aggressive is because the actual environment that the Vikings were living in was so difficult and so challenging and so unaccommodating, and so that's really kind of where I got the inspiration for that like a literal ice world. And then Grey London I obviously got to play with historically. Was that specific time period and what was going on with the royalty and what was going on in terms of the Industrial Revolution and war and the weaponry. So I pulled from each one, but I was really attracted to like a food and a color and a culture, and then I kind of used those as these like, almost like the Pinterest board inside my head, and then made something new from it.
So all of the characters in the series are extremely complex and three-dimensional. So I was wondering if there was one character above all the other ones that was the most difficult for you to write.
Yeah, Rye, the prince, absolutely. He's one of my favorite characters, but the thing is, Rye's a performer, so he adapts his outer self to his environment, to whoever he's around. And when you're writing a character that is performative, it's very, very hard to keep in mind at all times who they are underneath the performance. And so, whereas with Lila, I always knew what Lila was going to do, usually the worst thing possible. And Kel, I always knew how he was going to react. These are people who really kind of wear themselves on their sleeves in their own way. Rye doesn't. Rye changes his personality to the extent that he's able to fit his environment. And so because of that, he's a really hard character to write.
I saw on not Tumblr, I saw on Twitter recently that you sorted each of the characters into Hogwarts houses.
I did.
Okay, so that's one of my favorite things to do with characters. And I was wondering if you could give a little bit of an explanation as to why you sorted each character into their respective house.
Yeah, because there was like a little bit of surprise when I sorted them.
Yeah.
Because it takes a little bit of thinking. I'm a huge Harry Potter fan, and so I grew up with that. It was one of the things I wanted to do in writing the Shades of Magic series was to give you that same feeling of escapism. And
it absolutely accomplished
thank
that.
you.
It definitely did.
But so Lila's a Slytherin. That should not be a surprise to anyone. She's ambition above all. She's quite cutthroat in the literal sense. But yeah, she's driven. She's absolutely driven in that way. Kel is a Hufflepuff. I think a lot of people just automatically expect the hero protagonist to be sorted into Gryffindor, but Gryffindors are quite bold and quite daring to the point of brashness. Like, they don't always think things through. And Kel is actually far more likely to be a Hufflepuff. Like, he's much more sensitive. He feels things very deeply. I always say that the boys in my books are very emo and the girls are very, like, hardcore. It's the same with Kate and August in the Savage Song. Kate is a Slytherin, August is a Hufflepuff. Like, it's just the way they are. So Kel is the Hufflepuff in the series, and it works when we don't get enough, like, if you watch the movies, really enough of Hufflepuff, but in the books, he is a true Hufflepuff. He's nurturing, like, he cares to a fault. Rye is actually the Gryffindor. He is much more likely to do things without thinking about it. He's driven by passion and by kind of a desire for glory. That's why he does a lot of what he does in the first book, is this fear of not having magic and not having power and not being strong enough. And then Holland is Ravenclaw. And it's hard if you've only read book one, or even if you haven't finished book two, but as the series goes on, like, he's incredibly methodical. He thinks through everything. He's analytical. So yeah, like, those are those four main, and everyone's always like, but what about Alucard Emery? And I'm like, Alucard Emery clearly didn't go to Hogwarts. Like, there's no world in which he went to Hogwarts. Like, he was either a Durmstrang guy, or he just was like, he just tore up his letter and was like, nah, I'm good. So there's no world in which Alucard Emery went to Hogwarts with the rest of them.
What would you say is the biggest thing that motivates you and inspires you as a writer to keep writing? Because you've written so many books now, so many of them which have been bestsellers too, so that's a lot of dedication and time. So I'm wondering what helps you keep that motivation and inspiration going?
I think it helps that, and this was true 6 books ago and 12 books ago, and it's true now, I write for myself first. I write for myself as the primary audience. My middle grade books are written to 9-year-old me, my YA books are written to 17-year-old me, and my adult books are written to right now to 29-year-old me. I just write for myself, and because of that, I'm always writing with what do I want to read, and what will entertain me, and what will make me, think, or what demons am I trying to exercise through writing. So I just write for myself, and that means I stay passionate about it, because if I get bored or if I lose passion, the reader's going to feel it. They're going to lose passion. To this day, the people who have read Vicious, which was my first adult novel, can tell how much fun I had with that book. It was a book that I didn't tell anyone I was writing. I wrote it for 3 years in secret. in between other deadlines because I was falling out of love with writing. I was under contract and I was under a lot of pressure, and publishing wasn't going my way, and so I kind of felt like I was going to quit. And instead of quit, I opened up a blank document and I started saying, if I didn't have to worry about sellability, if I didn't have to worry about where this fit on a shelf, what would I write today? And the answer at the time was I was fascinated by supervillains, by anti-heroes, and by the idea that I wanted to write an entire book of bad people and make you root for one of them. Like, it was a writing challenge to myself, and I've never had so much fun because I put all of the other stuff aside. And ever since Vicious, that's now what I've tried to do. I have an idea that I want to explore, that I would want to read, and that's what I write. And the Shades of Magic series really was born out of that decision, because it was exactly what I wanted to read and what I hadn't read. You know, it's kind of a reaction to a lot of that grimdark fantasy out there that's just everyone dies all the time and there's really no hope, and there's no real escapism in that. Like, it's just like murder fantasy, and I kill my fair share of people, but like there has to be hope and there has to be escapism, there has to be whimsy for me, and so that's why I wrote Shades of Magic and then with the Savage Song, I wanted to write something without romance, and I wanted to do something very strange and very dark, and I was lucky enough at that point that my publisher let me. But for each and every one of my books, especially from Vicious on, I've written for myself.
My very last question is very random.
Okay.
It has nothing to do with any of the
I
books.
love random questions. They're my favorite.
But I'm just curious, how is Nimbus the Narwhal doing?
Oh my goodness, it's been a while. So I went through a narwhal obsession because I didn't realize that they were real, like for like 6 or 7 months. I just thought narwhals were the best mythological creature ever.
I have to agree.
Right? And then I found out they were real. And I made the mistake of like admitting to the internet that I didn't realize that they were real, and the internet tried to shame me, and I was like, no, you guys, this is even better. Because it's proof there's magic in the world. Like, it's proof either that God has a sense of humor or that there's actual magic out there, because they're the coolest animals ever, and they're so unnatural, and they really shouldn't survive, but they do. So I went through this stage where I just like collected narwhals. People still bring them to me, and I have a giant stuffed narwhal, and he actually sits on I have a giant bookshelf, and it's color coded. Like, it's a massive rainbow shelf, has more than 1,000 books on it, and at the edge it kind of steps down, and he sits on there. So he sits and he looks after my whole apartment.
It's the best place to be.
It
on
is.
A bookshelf.
He's on a bookshelf. He has a good view of everything.
That is it for this interview. Thank you so much, Victoria, for being here with me. A Conjuring of Light is out now. I have yet to read it. I am terrified.
It's gonna be fine. It's gonna be fine.
But if you guys haven't picked up this series yet, I highly recommend it. I have reviews for the first book and the second book, and a review for the third book will also be up. So thank you again so much for being here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!